Welcome back, scholars, to our Digital Academy. I am Professor Spark. Whether we are turning the pages of a timeless novel, our mission remains the same. Will today's sweep us into the concert hall? Let's find out together.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are tackling an absolute colossal piece of art. And I can practically guarantee you know this one by sound, even if the formal title doesn't immediately ring a bell. We're looking at Franz Liszt's staggering masterpiece, the Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 in C-sharp minor. Composed in 1847 and officially published in 1851, this is, without a doubt, the most famous of his 19 Hungarian rhapsodies for solo piano. Now, you might be sitting there wondering why a roughly 10-minute, mid-19th century virtuoso piano repertoire feels so universally familiar to us today. Well, you can thank the golden age of animation for that. This exact piece gained massive pop cultural fame by serving as the dizzying, frenetic soundtrack for cartoons, most famously, of course, Tom and Jerry. For a lot of us, it is literally the soundtrack of our childhoods. Okay, let's dive into this because this is where the story gets really, really fascinating. How exactly does a piece of music that most of us associate with a cartoon cat and mouse chasing each other across a piano actually begin its life as a profound act of national rebellion? Well, to understand all those dazzling piano tricks, we have to look at the deep, complex historical roots Liszt was actually pulling from. To really ground ourselves, we gotta start right at the musical core. Liszt drew incredibly heavily on Hungarian and Romani, or Gypsy, folk traditions. And the absolute foundation here is something called the csardas, which is a traditional Hungarian folk dance. Now, what makes the csardas so incredibly special is its distinct duality in tempo. It's this exact dance form that provides the architectural structure for Liszt's entire Rhapsody. And this brilliantly illustrates the profound duality of the composition itself. The piece is essentially split right into two main sections. First up, we have the lasan, or lazu. This part is slow, dramatic, and deeply melancholic. It essentially represents the dignified, sorrowful weight of history and folk memory. Then, in complete, stark contrast, we get the friska, or friss. This section is fast, energetic, totally joyful, and it channels this fiery resistance and just unbridled vitality. But Liszt didn't just borrow the structure and call it a day. He masterfully blended distinct Magyar and Romani folk elements directly into the actual notes. For instance, he used the Hungarian gypsy scale, which is a harmonic minor scale with a raised fourth. That's what gives it that incredibly distinct, somewhat exotic flavor. He brought in rhythmic spontaneity, expressive freedom, and then elevated the whole thing into this massive romantic showcase of high art virtuosity, using these dazzling octave runs and rapid scales. You know what's truly fascinating here, though? It's how Liszt pushed the physical boundaries of the piano itself. In that frantic, fast-paced friska section we talked about, you'll hear this rapid, percussive sparkle. That's actually Liszt intentionally imitating the cymbalum. It's a hammered dulcimer that is a super central, authentic instrument in traditional Hungarian gypsy bands, so he effectively turned the grand piano into a massive folk instrument. Section 2. Fueling a national awakening and how music acted as a cultural rebellion. Let's move to the timeline and see how this all builds up. To really grasp this rebellion, we have to look at the mid-19th century. This was a time of rising nationalist sentiments all across Europe, especially within the Austrian Empire. For suppressed ethnic groups like the Hungarians, music was not just evening entertainment, it was a vital tool to assert their cultural identity. Even though Liszt lived a lot of his life abroad, he was fiercely proud of his Hungarian heritage. In the 1840s, he's traveling through Hungary, actively collecting these folk melodies. He composes the Rhapsody in 1847. Then, literally just 1 year later, in 1848, the Hungarian Revolution kicks off, a revolution that is eventually suppressed with Russian aid. So by the time this piece is published in 1851, it is inextricably tied to all this geopolitical turmoil. It perfectly captures the spirit of a people asserting who they are against imperial suppression. Through all of this, Liszt developed what became famously known as the style hongrois, or the Hungarian style. But here's the kicker. He wasn't just strictly quoting folk tunes like a historian logging data. He abstracted them. He took elements like the dotted rhythms of verbunkos, which were these traditional military recruiting dances, and idealized them. He elevated this raw folk material into a powerful high art symbol of national awakening. He was basically creating a romantic vision of Hungary that was proud, exotic, passionate, and fiercely resilient. Moving on to our next section, the philosophy of the tone poet and rewriting the rules of classical music. Because look, Liszt wasn't just making a political statement here, he was making a profoundly artistic one too. He deeply believed that the artist was a tone poet. His mission, as he literally described it, was to reveal, exalt, and deify human consciousness. He viewed the folk spirit he collected in Hungary not just as a bunch of neat little melodies, but as a source of authentic, vital truth. For him, music was meant to be a bridge between the national and the universal, pushing back against cosmopolitan suppression with pure, unfiltered human expression. So, the crucial point is how this philosophy actually dictated the shape of the music. Just look at the contrast here. Liszt completely rejected the rigid classical forms of the past, with their strict rules and constrained expression. Instead, he championed what we call rhapsodic structure. This meant the music was episodic, it was improvisational, and it had a very organic flow to it. It perfectly mirrored the whole romantic emphasis on individual expression, individual genius, and the pursuit of the sublime. And he achieved this organic flow through a really clever technique called thematic transformation. Basically, if you listen closely to the sorrowful, slow Lassen section, you're actually hearing Liszt subtly foreshadow the joyful melodies of the fast Friska section that comes later. And this isn't just a neat little musical parlor trick. Philosophically, it reflects organic unity. It embodies a romantic ideal of growth, development, and becoming. The joy is quite literally born out of the sorrow. Which brings us to our final section. The ultimate emotional catharsis, a true journey in sound. All right, let's walk through the actual experience of listening to this masterpiece, because the pacing is just breathtaking. It's essentially a 5-step emotional roller coaster. We start with step 1, that dark, dramatic, introspective opening of the Lassen, packed with strong low chords and mournful melodies. Then step 2 is a transition that meticulously builds suspense, playing around with that gypsy improvisatory seduction. Step 3, it absolutely erupts. The Friska brings this explosive communal energy, defiance, and toe-tapping rhythm. Step 4 offers a very brief reflective calm, just a tiny moment to catch your breath. And then finally, step 5, a thrilling, accelerating, hill-like undulation of sound that releases into an absolute euphoric whirlwind. It is a total masterclass in tension and release. Now, because the emotional and technical demands here are just so incredibly high, interpreting this piece is a monumental task for any pianist. But what's wonderful is that Liszt actually included an optional cadenza, a moment for the performer to just improvise, which perfectly affirms his belief in spontaneity. And this rewards so many diverse approaches. You've got Rousseau's highly acclaimed performance praised for its sheer technical brilliance. You have Adam George's deeply passionate live accounts. And then there's this staggering virtuosity of artists like Nobuyuki Tsuji. Each of them brings a totally unique spectrum of fiery showmanship and nuanced lyricism to the table. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder today. We started out by recognizing this music as the silly soundtrack to a cartoon cat and mouse. But as we've seen, it's actually a profound vessel for historical weight, for philosophical rebellion, and for the full spectrum of human emotion. So I want to ask you, if a 19th century piano piece can carry all of that depth, what untold stories, what quiet rebellions might be hiding right now in the background music of your own life? Keep listening closely.